The hand that closed around Eleanor Coulter's throat belonged to a man who had done this before. You could tell by the way he moved. No hesitation, no glance around the room to see who was watching. Just a deliberate reach and a practiced grip and the quiet certainty of someone who had learned over a long career of doing things like this, that most people, when something wrong happens directly in front of them, will find somewhere else to look. He was right about that. Every person in Patty's diner on that Thursday morning looked somewhere else. Every person except one. The woman sitting by the window in the faded canvas jacket didn't look away. She didn't stand up, didn't raise her voice, didn't reach for her phone. She did none of the things a person is supposed to do when something wrong is happening 3 feet away. She set her coffee cup down, slowly, deliberately. The way you set something down when you have decided you are finished with it, and everything that follows from that decision has already been made. Her name was Ray Coulter. The woman whose throat that hand was wrapped around was her mother. And the man who had put his hand there had been told specifically and clearly to find Ray Coulter and deliver a message. He had found her 40 minutes ago. He just didn't know it yet. Millhaven, Kansas occupies a particular position in the geography of the American interior, not quite forgotten, not quite remembered, existing in the way that thousands of towns like it exist, suspended between what they were and what they haven't yet decided to become. 4,000 people, a main street with a hardware store and a post office and a diner, a water tower with the town's name in letters that had been fading since the 90s. Two churches facing each other across the same intersection they had faced each other across for 60 years, which people in Millhaven found either poetic or funny, depending on the week. The diner was called Patty's. It had been called Patty's Place once 30 years ago, and then the owner had changed the sign to Patty's Diner, but nobody had updated the habit, so it was still Patty's Place to everyone who lived there. The sign said one thing and the people said another, and after enough years, it stopped mattering which was right. The booths had red vinyl seats patched in places with electrical tape. The coffee came in thick ceramic mugs that had survived every winter since 1987. The pie case by the register held whatever Norma had brought that morning, and on Thursdays in November, Norma brought apple, and it smelled the way apple pie is supposed to smell, like cinnamon and warmth, and a house where someone is paying attention. Eleanor Coulter had been coming to Patty's every Thursday morning for 11 years. She was 72 years old and had lived in Millhaven for all of them, and people in town called her Miss Ellie with the specific warmth of a community name, the kind that gets given once and never reconsidered because it fits too well. She had taught Sunday school at First Methodist for 3 decades. She brought soup to sick neighbors. She sat with families in hospital waiting rooms, not because she was related to any of them, but because she believed with the practical and unshakable faith of a woman who had lived a full life that no one should receive bad news alone. She had outlasted 2 pastors, 1 church renovation, and a schism over the color of the new carpet. She had organized the food drive every November for 22 years. She was the kind of woman that small towns occasionally produce, the kind everyone recognizes and nobody knows how to replace. On this particular Thursday, she was dressed slightly better than usual. The newer cardigan, not the everyday one, her hair pinned with more care. There was a brightness about her when she came in. Norma noticed it immediately, the way Norma noticed most things about her regulars after 11 years, the brightness of anticipation of looking forward to something specific. Her daughter was coming home. "My Ray's coming in today," she told Norma when the tea was set down. "It's been almost 3 years." "What does she do now, Miss Ellie?" Eleanor smiled in the small, practiced way of a woman who has answered a version of this question many times. "She works with machinery, mechanical things, works far from here, stays very busy." A pause, then more to herself than to Norma. "She had me sign some papers a while back, said it was insurance business. I didn't ask too many questions. She stays so busy." Norma nodded and moved on. That small comment, floating up like steam from the tea, would mean nothing for several hours. It would mean a great deal before the day was over. There were 4 people already in the diner when Eleanor arrived, whom she had not seen before. The large one was in the far left corner, with a folded newspaper enormous through the shoulders, dark beard going silver at the jaw. He had been there when Norma opened and had not moved significantly since. He had ordered black coffee and pancakes and eaten everything slowly, and asked for a second coffee, and was now doing a very convincing impression of a man reading the sports section. Near the right wall, in a chair angled 20 degrees toward the front door, a broad man in a gray sweatshirt was looking at a phone whose screen had been dark for 20 minutes. His thumb had not moved. He was watching the entrance the way people watch things when the watching is the point and the phone is just somewhere to put their eyes. At a center table, a third man in a canvas work jacket sat with his hands visible on the table in front of him. He had ordered nothing. He had been asked nothing. He occupied his chair with the specific stillness of someone comfortable with the work of waiting. The fourth was in the back corner, nearest the kitchen, lean narrow-faced with eyes that tracked slightly to the periphery of wherever they appeared to be aimed. He had been there longest of all. Norma had looked at him once at opening and had not found a reason to look again, which itself was a kind of reason. 4 people, 4 positions, covering every angle of entry and exit in a diner that had 3 of each. Nobody connected them to each other. One person noticed where they were sitting and how. That person was Lena Croft. Lena was 34, a reporter at the Millhaven Courier for 6 years, and she had been in the diner since 10 that morning with a laptop and a recording device propped against the napkin holder. She was ostensibly interviewing the owner about the economic effects of the Tillis building and supply expansion on local small businesses. In practice, she had been doing this interview in slow installments for 3 weeks, letting the owner get comfortable, letting the real story develop in the margins of the scheduled one. The real story was Craig Tillis. She had been building it for 3 months. 17 cases documented. 17 people older, mostly working class, the kind of people who sign contracts at kitchen tables. Because no one in their life had ever explained that the most dangerous sentence in any lending document is the one in the smallest print in the last subsection on the second to last page. 17 people who had borrowed money from Tillis Financial LLC to fix storm damage, to cover medical bills, to bridge a gap that needed bridging, and had found themselves within weeks owing amounts that bore no resemblance to what they thought they had agreed to. She had the contracts. She had the payment records. She had 11 recorded testimonies. She had a land acquisition map given to her nervously and off the record by a source inside the county assessor's office showing the properties Craig Tillis had absorbed over 4 years. What she still needed was the thread connecting the loans to the land, the mechanism, the proof that made it a plan rather than a series of coincidences. She was working on that thread when Eleanor Coulter walked in at 10:45, and she filed Eleanor away as a regular, local, ordinary someone who belonged to this diner the way the pie case belonged to it, and went back to her notes. She looked up again at 10:55 when the door opened and Ray Coulter walked in. She came in the way she had done everything since she was young, with an economy of movement that didn't announce itself. She held the door for a moment from force of habit, even though the nearest person behind her was 20 feet back and didn't need it. She stepped inside and stopped for 2 seconds just inside the threshold, and in those 2 seconds her eyes moved across the whole room without appearing to. Left corner, right wall, center, back, kitchen door, emergency exit, filed and finished in the time it takes most people to decide where to put their coat. Then she saw her mother in the third booth and walked toward her. She was 52 years old, medium height with the kind of build that reads as unremarkable until you look at how she moves. Dark hair cut short and practical, shot through with early gray at the temples. She wore a canvas work jacket over a gray thermal shirt, dark jeans and lace-up boots with composite soles. The boots of someone who spends time on uneven ground and has stopped pretending otherwise. No jewelry, no makeup, no visible markers of anything except a woman of a certain age who had practical habits. The kind of woman a man like Briggs would walk past without slowing down. The kind of woman a man like Tillis would not be able to picture when someone said her name. She had been called Ray since she was 7 years old when her father had started calling her that, and it had stuck the way childhood names stick by becoming more real than the official one. Her birth certificate said Rachel. Her driver's license said Rachel. Every official document in her life said Rachel. Everyone who knew her called her Ray, including Craig Tillis, who had been given her name 3 days ago by a source and had done what people do when they encounter a name that could go either way, assumed the more common gender, and built his plan round that assumption. Ray sat down across from her mother. Eleanor was already reaching for her, the hand that needed to confirm a person was real and present after 3 years of Sunday phone calls and absence. Ray took her mother's hand in both of hers and held it off for a moment, and in that moment the self-containment that she carried like a second layer of clothing was briefly absent. She was just a daughter sitting down with her mother on a Thursday morning, holding her hand. "You look exactly the same," Ray said. "I look 3 years older. My knees know it even if my mirror doesn't. Your knees are fine. My knees are 72. They file complaints." Ray almost smiled. The almost of it was visible for just a second in the lines at the corners of her eyes. Norma came over with fresh coffee before Ray asked, set it down, said, Good to have you back, hun, in the tone of someone who vaguely places a face from years past and moved on. Ray wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at her mother. Eleanor looked back with the attentiveness that parents develop when a child has been gone long enough that seeing them again requires adjustment, taking inventory, checking the distance between memory and presence. Those papers, Eleanor said, the ones you had me sign a couple years back. I remember. Was it really insurance? Ray held her mother's gaze. It was paperwork that protects you. That part was true. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her tea and nodded once, and that was the end of that for now. Ray looked out the window at the parking lot and the flat November sky beyond it and thought about Walt Sykes. Walt Sykes was 71 years old and had spent 38 years as an electrician and had retired at 63 with the specific and reasonable expectation of a man who had done everything correctly that the world would let him rest. Then the August storms had come through Millhaven and put a section of oak tree through his roof, and the insurance had covered part of the damage, and Walt had needed $11,000 to cover the rest. He had borrowed it from Tillis Financial, LLC, because Craig Tillis's name was on things in Millhaven, the way weather is on things everywhere, part of the landscape unquestioned, because the office was on Main Street, because Tillis had shaken Walt's hand at the food bank 3 years running. 6 weeks after Walt signed the contract, which was 38 pages in which Walt had not read past page 4, because nobody had ever suggested to him that the people offering to help you might be the people most worth reading, carefully his balance was $17,200. 2 weeks after that, with fees compounding, it was climbing toward $21,000. Walt did not have $21,000. Walt had never had $21,000 in one place at one time in his 68 years of adult life. Ray had heard about Walt from her mother mentioned in passing on a Sunday call in September. Poor old Walt Sykes, you remember, Mr. Sykes, he's in a terrible spot. And she had filed it away, and the following week she had made some inquiries, and what she had found had confirmed exactly what a man named Gareth Mosley had told her 14 months earlier in a hospital room in Wichita, with the clarity that sometimes arrives when everything else has fallen away. Gareth Mosley had been 58 years old and had been part of Ray's organization for 11 years, and 6 years before he died, he had lost his house and then his marriage and then his health through a business arrangement with a man in Millhaven named Craig Tillis. He had said near the end, looking at the window from the hospital bed, he's still doing it, to other people, still doing it. Ray had promised to look into it. She kept her promises. So she had come back to Millhaven, and she had parked her truck 2 blocks from the diner, and she was sitting across from her mother in the third booth on the left, and in the days ahead, she intended to have a conversation with Craig Tillis about Walt Sykes and Millicent Cross, and 21 other names on a list that a lawyer named Marcus Webb had spent 3 months assembling. She was still thinking about the shape of that conversation when the door opened at 11:09 and Briggs walked in. His name was Devin Briggs, and he had spent 9 years as a police officer in a city 40 miles east before an internal affairs investigation had concluded, in the particular careful language of such proceedings, that he had applied force inconsistent with departmental standards on multiple occasions. The sealed records contained more specific language. The people who had not pressed further contained more specific memories. He worked for Craig Tillis now, had for 3 years. He handled the situations that lawyers and accountants could not handle, the situations where the message needed to be delivered through a medium other than paper. He was 44 years old, built wide through the chest with the practiced physical authority of someone who had trained it into himself in his 20s and maintained it as a kind of professional credential. Dark jacket, dark shirt, the boots of a man who expected to stand on both feet and stay standing. He came through the door and stopped inside it and looked at the room. He was doing what Ray had done 14 minutes earlier, reading the space, but where Ray had cataloged, Briggs was calculating. Power ratios, obstacles, ease of exit. He identified Eleanor Coulter from the description Tillis had given him. Older woman, white hair, third booth on the left. Straightforward. He scanned the rest of the room and saw the large man with the newspaper, the man in the sweatshirt, the man in the canvas jacket, the lean figure in the back corner. He registered them as scenery. On his way to Eleanor's booth, he passed the table by the window where a woman in a canvas jacket was looking outside. He glanced at her once the way you glance at furniture. Hey, I need this section. Move to another table. The woman looked at her coffee, did not move. Briggs stopped. He looked at her fully for the first time, medium height, practical clothes, the kind of face that didn't register as significant. Nobody. He'd walked past 100 versions of her. You hear me? The woman picked up her coffee and drank from it. Briggs made a short sound in the back of his throat. Dismissal compressed into a single breath and continued to Eleanor's booth and sat down across from her without being invited. Eleanor looked up from her book. She was not alarmed. She was the way she was with misbehavior, attentive measuring, waiting to understand before deciding how to respond. "Miss Ellie," Briggs said, and his voice had the practiced warmth of a man who had learned to deploy it precisely. "I'm from Craig Tillis's office. Mr. Tillis would like to meet with your daughter, Ray Coulter, before 5 o'clock today. He knows about the situation." Eleanor looked at him. "I don't know who you are," she said. "You don't need to. You just need to pass the message." "I don't pass messages for strangers, and I'd appreciate it if you'd take that chair back where you found it." She said it the way she said things to students who had forgotten their manners, without heat, without theater, with the complete calm of someone who meant exactly what she said. Briggs reached into his pocket and placed his phone on the table between them. The screen showed a photograph of a house-white siding-covered porch. The pot of mums by the front step shot through the window of a parked car on the street. "You live alone," he said. "Older house. Could use some looking after." The room changed, not physically. The temperature was unchanged, the coffee was still hot, but something shifted in the air, the way it shifts when everyone in a space recognizes simultaneously that something is wrong and nobody is sure yet what to do about it. Norma had gone still behind the counter, a dish towel held in both hands, not wringing it, just holding it. A man eating alone near the back had stopped eating. The couple near the front door were making the small, quiet movements of people preparing to be somewhere else. In the back corner, the lean man's left hand had moved to the surface of the table, fingers spread. At the center table, the man in the canvas jacket had shifted his weight forward by barely an inch. Lena Croft had lowered her laptop screen 3 inches and tilted her recording device half a turn. Eleanor looked at the photograph of her house. Then she looked at Briggs. Her hands were flat on the table. Her spine was straight. There was no fear in her posture, or rather there was something that had moved through fear and arrived at something beyond it, the specific composure of a woman who has decided that whatever is happening, she is not going to give this man the satisfaction of watching her diminish. "I think," she said, "that you are making a serious mistake, and I would like you to leave this table. I'll leave when you've passed the message. Your daughter Ray needs to come see Mr. Tillis before my daughter," Eleanor said, "is none of your business." Briggs leaned back. He looked at the woman across from him with the particular patience of someone who is waiting for the moment when a person's composure breaks and the real negotiating begins. He had done this before. It always broke. It was just a question of how long and what it took. He stood up. He walked around the booth slowly, without urgency, with the ease of a man who is comfortable in the space between intention and action. He stopped behind Eleanor's chair, and he put his hand around her throat. Not to cause injury, not the way of someone out of control. In the trained, precise way of someone who knows exactly how much pressure communicates helplessness without leaving evidence, his fingers wrapping the side of her neck, his thumb pressed against the front, her head drawn back by a degree that left her looking at the ceiling, and the message of the grip was not ambiguous at any frequency. "You are completely in my hands, and we both know what that means." The diner was absolutely silent. Norma did not move. The man who had stopped eating did not move. Outside, a truck passed on Main Street, and the sound of it was the only sound in the world. "Tell your daughter Ray to come see Mr. Tillis," Briggs said quietly. "Before 5 o'clock. Tell her if she doesn't." Eleanor Coulter's hands were still flat on the table. She was looking at the wall, at the clock above the counter, at the ordinary fixtures of a diner she had been coming to for 11 years. And then she said in a voice that did not waver and was not loud and contained something that the people in that room would describe later in different words, but all mean the same thing, the quiet of bedrock: "Take your hand off me." Not a plea, not a question, a fact about the immediate future stated in advance. Briggs tightened his grip slightly. He was going to say something. The breath was already forming. "She's right." The voice came from directly behind him. Not loud, not raised. It had the quality of something that has never needed to be loud because the thing behind it has never needed volume to be understood. Briggs turned around. The woman from the window table was standing directly behind him. Not across the room, not at a distance. Directly behind him, close enough that he could see the stitching on her jacket, the early gray in her short dark hair, the small scar along her left collarbone, where it disappeared under her collar. She was looking at him with eyes that were not angry and not afraid, and not any category he had a ready name for. Just fully present, fully decided. He had told this woman to move to another table 18 minutes ago. She had drunk her coffee and looked out the window. He had dismissed her as nobody. He had not seen her stand up, had not heard her cross the room. "She's right," the woman said again. Briggs looked at her. His hand was still on Eleanor's throat. "Who are you?" he said. The question of a man who is recategorizing in real time and does not like what the recategorization is producing. "Let go of her," the woman said. "Then we'll talk." The four men in the four corners of the diner had not moved, but the room felt them now, the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm, not through any single sense, but through all of them at once. The large man in the left corner had set his newspaper down. The man in the sweatshirt had turned his chair to face the center of the room. The man in the canvas jacket had both hands on the table visible. The lean man in the back had not moved at all, but his stillness had acquired a different quality, coiled rather than idle. Briggs took his hand off Eleanor's throat. He stepped back. He looked at the woman in the canvas jacket standing in front of him, and he said again with a slight edge now, "I asked who you are." The woman looked at him for a long, even moment. "Ray Coulter," she said. The silence that followed had a specific texture to it. Briggs heard it. He processed it. He looked at the woman in front of him, the woman he had walked past his furniture, the woman he had told to move to another table, the woman whose coffee he had interrupted. And he looked at her, and something happened behind his eyes that was not quite understanding, but was the beginning of it, the first cold inch of water before the flood. "You're," he started. "Ray Coulter," she said again, exactly as before. "The person Mr. Tillis sent you to find." The man in the left corner had picked up his newspaper again. He was reading it, or appeared to be. The man in the sweatshirt had turned his phone over in his hand. The man in the canvas jacket had not moved his hands from the table. The lean man had placed his left hand flat, fingers spread. None of them spoke. None of them looked at Ray. But Briggs understood, in the way you understand certain things before you can articulate them, that the room had already resolved and he was standing on the wrong side of the resolution. He straightened. He rebuttoned his jacket. He looked at Ray with the expression of a man maintaining a surface while everything beneath it is engaged in rapid restructuring. "Mr. Tillis," he said, "wants to see you before 5 o'clock. You know what this is about." "I know what he thinks it's about," Ray said. "There's a difference." Briggs looked at her for another moment. His gaze moved to Eleanor, who was sitting exactly as she had been, hands flat, spine straight, looking at the clock above the counter. "Before 5, Briggs said. "I heard you," Ray said. "You can go now." He held his position for 3 more seconds. 5. Then he turned and walked to the door, and he did not look at the four men as he passed them, because looking at them would require acknowledging that they were something other than scenery, and he was not ready to make that acknowledgement out loud. The door opened. The door closed. Norma exhaled. The sound was small and involuntary, and broke the stillness the way a pebble breaks still water, in rings outward until the ordinary sounds of the morning reasserted themselves. Coffee machine. Distant traffic. A dish settling in the kitchen with a small clattering sound that was in its way the most comforting sound in the world. Ray stood where she was for a moment. Then she turned and sat back down across from her mother. She picked up her coffee. It had gone cold while she was standing. She drank from it anyway. Eleanor was looking at her daughter with an expression that had several layers, the way certain expressions do when a person has been holding them for a long time. "He didn't know," Eleanor said. "Not about the hand on her throat, about something else." "No," Ray said. "He didn't. Tillis told him to look for Ray Coulter, and he assumed yes. And you sat there and let him think you were someone else." "I was drinking my coffee." Eleanor looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she looked at the clock. Then she looked at her tea. "How long have you been in town?" she said. "Since Wednesday morning." "And those men?" It wasn't a question, but Ray answered it. "Since Tuesday night." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She had the quality of a woman processing information that changes the shape of things she thought she already understood. "Ray, Mom, what is this? What is all of this?" Ray held her mother's gaze. She looked at her with the directness of a person who has decided that the version of this conversation they have been not having for years is going to happen now. Not all of it, not the parts that would only cause pain, but the true center of it. "Walt Sykes," she said, "borrowed $11,000 from Craig Tillis to fix his roof. 6 weeks later, he owed $17,000. In 3 months, at the rate it's climbing, he'll owe more than he'll ever have." Eleanor was very still. "And it's not just Walt," Ray said. It's Millicent Cross. She's 81 years old and she's in a care facility on the other side of the county because she lost her house to a loan. She couldn't read well enough to understand what she was agreeing to. And there are 21 other people with names on a list that a lawyer in Kansas City has been building for 3 months. You know about all of this, Eleanor said. I do now. Since when? Since you mentioned Walt in September. And since, Ray paused, since someone who was important to me spent the last months of his life asking me to look into it. Eleanor absorbed this. She looked at her daughter's hands around the coffee mug, at the scar on the collarbone, at all the things she had chosen for many years not to ask direct questions about. The papers I signed, she said. Yes. Tell me what they were. They were the transfer of a land parcel into an LLC. The LLC is in your name. Why my name? Because your name has no connection to anything Tillis could argue was hostile. Your name is clean. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that has weight. I wish you had told me, she said. I know, I should have. She looked at her daughter, not with anger, not with hurt, with the particular clarity of a woman who has been paying attention her entire life and has arrived in this moment at a new and revised understanding of a situation she thought she already understood. He's going to come back, she said. Yes. Today. Yes, he came himself last time within 2 hours of sending Briggs. He'll do the same. And when he does, Ray set her coffee cup down. Then it ends, she said. Too bad to know. Eleanor Coulter looked at her daughter for a long moment, at the gray in her hair, and the way she sat, and the steadiness in her eyes, and she seemed to arrive at a decision of her own, the way she arrived at most decisions quietly, thoroughly, without announcing it. All right, she said. She picked up her menu even though she knew every item on it by heart. Then we eat first. I want the soup. Norma appeared with fresh coffee for Ray and didn't charge for it. In the back corner booth, Lena Croft sat with her laptop open and typed 11 words in her notes that she had not planned to type when she sat down that morning. Ray Coulter is a woman. She was here before Tillis sent anyone. She looked at the woman in the canvas jacket eating soup with her elderly mother. She looked at the 4 men at the 4 tables. She looked at the recording device on her napkin holder. Its red light steady, and she thought about the story she had been building for 3 months and understood with the particular clarity that comes to journalists at certain moments that the story had just become substantially larger than what she had thought it was. She did not turn the recorder off. Craig Tillis arrived at Patty's Diner at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He came in his white Escalade parked across 2 spaces with the ease of a man accustomed to having room, and walked to the door in a charcoal suit with a white shirt open at the collar, not the full armor of a business confrontation, but the calibrated informality of a man who wants to be read as reasonable. His lawyer Patterson walked half a step behind him, carrying a leather portfolio. Tillis stopped just inside the door and looked at the room and found the booth he was looking for. He found Eleanor first. Then he followed Eleanor's sightline to the woman across from her. He stopped. He had been told by Briggs on the phone 40 minutes ago that Ray Coulter was a woman. Briggs had told him this in the flat, slightly stiff voice of someone reporting information that had surprised them and is still in the process of being categorized. Tillis had listened and had adjusted his mental image of the person he was coming to see, and had come anyway because 20 years of operating in Millhaven had built in him a confidence that was not easily disturbed by new information. He walked to the booth and looked at Eleanor with the practiced warmth of a man who has spent decades deploying practiced warmth. Miss Ellie, I want to start by apologizing for this morning. What Briggs did was completely outside what I asked of him. That's not acceptable, and I've told him so. Eleanor looked at him. She picked up her tea and drank from it and set it back down and said nothing. Tillis held her gaze for a moment. Something moved in his face, a small adjustment, the recalibration of a man whose expected response didn't come. He turned to Ray. Ray, he said, the use of the name was careful and deliberate, the way you use a name when you want to establish that you know it. I think we can talk like reasonable people. I'd like to sit down. Ray gestured to the seat across from her. Tillis sat. Patterson took a position beside the booth portfolio under his arm. I know who you are, Tillis said. Plain, factual, meant to communicate that he had done his research and that his arrival here was not the act of someone operating blind. I want you to know that up front. I'm not here without information. All right, Ray said. What Walt Sykes owes under his contract is a legitimate debt. I'm not asking you to cover it. What I'm asking is for you to think about context. I have been part of this community for 20 years. I employ people here. I've invested in things that didn't have to be invested in. And the presence of he chose his next word with visible care. Organization creates complications that go beyond whatever personal concern brought you here. What do you want? Ray said. No preamble, no negotiating posture. Just the question, flat and direct, cutting through the prepared speech. Tillis paused, adjusted. I want you to leave Millhaven today, before 5 o'clock. You go, I'll discuss Walt Sykes' situation through appropriate channels. Patterson can have something drawn up by end of week. Everybody moves forward. He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope and set it on the table. If you choose to stay and continue whatever you came here to do, I have to protect my interests. This is a civil complaint, interference with business operations. It hasn't been filed yet. Patterson is waiting on my word. You leave today, I never file it. Your name stays out of the county court records entirely. He pushed the envelope slightly forward. You go home this afternoon, this ends here. Ray looked at the envelope. She did not touch it. She looked at it the way she had looked at Briggs in the doorway, reading it, cataloging what it meant and where it sat in the larger picture. Then a chair moved. Lena Croft stood up from the corner table. She walked across the diner with the measured pace of someone who has made an irreversible decision and is walking toward it rather than away from it, and she stopped at the edge of the booth and placed a business card on the table in front of Craig Tillis. Mr. Tillis, Lena Croft, Millhaven Courier. I've been building an investigation into Tillis Financial ELLC for 3 months. I have 17 documented cases, borrowers, contracts, payment, timelines, outcomes. I'd like the opportunity to ask you some questions. My number's on the card. Any day this week works. She said it with the practiced neutrality of a journalist who has learned to deliver the first contact on a difficult story in a way that leaves no opening for anger, because there is no emotion in it to be angry at. Tillis looked at the card. He picked it up. He looked at Lena. Then he looked at the corner table where she had come from, at the laptop, at the recording device with its steady red light. He looked at Ray, and in the 2 seconds it took him to complete that sequence of looks, to add Eleanor, to add the recorder, to add 17 documented cases and 3 months of reporting, something changed in his face. Not the surface. The surface was professionally intact. Something underneath the surface. The recognition of a geometry he had not walked into expecting. He had come here this afternoon thinking he understood the terms. He had Briggs's report, his lawyer, his envelope, and 20 years of local credibility, and he had expected to walk out having reestablished his authority over the situation. Having demonstrated to Ray Coulter that whatever she had come to Millhaven to accomplish, it would cost more than it was worth. What he had not known, what he could not have known, because it required information he hadn't had this morning, was that the woman who had been sitting in the corner booth since 10 o'clock was a reporter who had been building a case against him for 3 months, and that Briggs had done what he did to Eleanor at 11:17 in the morning directly in front of her. The video was not Ray's. It had never been Ray's. It lived in the possession of a journalist at the local newspaper, completely outside of anything Ray had done or hadn't done, and it would exist regardless of whether Ray left Millhaven today or stayed for a year. Patterson had made the same calculation. Ray could see it as the slight forward shift of his weight. I'll be in touch, Tillis said to Lena. His voice was unchanged. That was the real craft of him, the surface held under the pressure, the way a river surface holds even when the current below it is changing direction. He set her card in his breast pocket. He straightened the envelope on the table. Think about what I've said, he told Ray. I've thought about it, Ray said. Tillis waited. There wasn't more. He stood up. Patterson stepped back. Tillis buttoned the center button of his jacket and turned toward the door and stopped. He had turned back to the booth. He was looking at Eleanor. Miss Ellie, he said with the warmth fully restored, with the regret back in his face exactly where it had been. I'm sorry for any disruption today. That's not the kind of person I want to be in this community. Eleanor Coulter looked at Craig Tillis through her reading glasses. She did not look angry. She did not look mollified. She looked at him with the complete, unhurried attention of a woman who has made an assessment and finished with it. She said nothing. Tillis held her gaze for 2 seconds. Then he turned and walked to the door with Patterson behind him, and the bell above it made its small sound, and they were gone. Norma set down the cloth she had been holding and went into the kitchen without speaking. The sound of water running followed. Somewhere in the room, a normal conversation resumed in normal tones. The coffee machine hissed. A chair scraped. The tick of the clock above the pie case reasserted itself. Lena Croft walked back to her corner booth and sat down. She did not look at Ray. She opened her laptop. Eleanor was looking at her daughter. Ray was watching the parking lot through the window, the white Escalade backing out, pulling onto Main Street, disappearing north toward the Tillis building in supply headquarters. She watched until it turned the corner. He's going to come back, Eleanor said. With more people. Yes. And that's what you want. Ray turned from the window. He spent 20 years building this town around himself. The only way the people here see what he's actually built is if he pulls it into one place and shows them. He won't be able to help himself. Eleanor considered this. And the papers I signed? Yes. For the land? Yes. The Mosley land. Ray went still for just a moment. You knew about Gareth Mosley. I knew a man named Mosley sold land out past the county road about 6 years ago. I knew he was in some financial trouble at the time. I knew Craig Tillis bought the land. Eleanor paused. I knew his name was on your list of members. The silence between them was the specific silence of a conversation arriving at a truth that has been traveling toward it for a long time. He was important to you, Eleanor said. Yes. And Tillis took everything he had? But yes. So you came back. I came back for you, Ray said. And for Walt. And yes, for Gareth. All three are true. None of them cancels the others. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. All right, she said. She put her hand over her daughter's hand on the table. A brief, firm pressure. Then she picked up her book. Tell me when you need me to come outside. Ray looked at her mother, this woman who had lived in this town for 50 years and taught its children, and sat with its grief and never once asked for anything in return except to be left in peace to do what she believed it was good, and something moved in her face that rarely moved there. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Eleanor said. Heat up my soup, it's gone cold. Craig Tillis sat in his office for 22 minutes after returning from the diner. The office was everything you would expect: oak paneling, corner windows, the wall of photographs and plaques that constituted the visible record of 2 decades of civic presence. His face at the chamber dinner, his name on the food bank plaque, a 2019 photograph of him presenting an oversized check to the school district surrounded by children in blue and gold. Patterson sat across from him. They had been mostly silent. The video, Patterson said? Yes. She's had it since 11:15. She didn't come to you with it, didn't contact you, didn't reference it. She's building a story around it, not using it as leverage, which means it's going into print regardless of what I do, Tillis said. Yes. Another silence. How much does she have? I don't know yet. 17 documented cases is significant. In the context of a video showing Briggs assaulting an elderly woman in connection with your operation. I know what it means, Tillis said. He turned to the window. The afternoon light was going amber long and flat across the building facades of Main Street. Coulter has been here since Wednesday, he said. Those 4 men have been here since Tuesday. Which means she planned this, Patterson said carefully. She expected this conversation to happen. She positioned the reporter, or at minimum, she knew the reporter was there. She positioned everything. The witnesses, the reporter, the legal framework. The whole morning was a setup to get me to do something public. Patterson said nothing. He had identified the conclusion Tillis was arriving at and understood that, pointing out the obvious implication, which was that if the morning was a setup, then the correct response was not to walk into the second half of the setup would not be welcome. Get me Frank Odom, Tillis said, Dave Mercer, the Paulson brothers, whoever on the business council you can reach before 4 o'clock. Craig, I want them in the parking lot at Patty's at 4 o'clock. And you want them to see what exactly Tillis turned from the window. I want them to see Ray Coulter leave. I want this town to see that when someone comes in from outside and tries to disrupt what we built here, we stand together. I want the reporter to film 20 years of relationships. Patterson held his portfolio and was quiet for a moment. If you pull those people into this, he said, and it goes wrong, make the calls, Patterson. Patterson made the calls. What neither of them understood, what Tillis could not have understood without knowing things about Ray Coulter that had not yet been made visible in this story, was that she had been waiting for exactly this decision. Not the diner that morning, not the conversation over the envelope, not Briggs at 11 and Tillis at 1. This, Craig Tillis gathering the people of Millhaven into one place to watch him win. Because a man who pulls his web tight in one direction exposes every other direction at once. And the people of Millhaven, Walt Sykes' neighbors and Millicent Cross's former neighbors, and the farmers whose land appeared on a map that a source inside the county assessor's office had given to a journalist 3 months ago, those people did not yet know what they were standing inside. They were going to see it at 4 o'clock. In the parking lot of the diner where Miss Ellie had been drinking tea on Thursday mornings for 11 years. Craig Tillis had spent 20 years learning how to keep this town. He had just made the only move that guaranteed he would lose it. The 4 o'clock light in Millhaven in November was amber and low, coming in at an angle that made the grain elevator look like hammered copper and put long shadows across the parking lot of Patty's Diner. The American flags on the houses along the street moved in a cold wind that had been building since mid-afternoon. Ray stood at the window and watched them arrive. They came in ones and twos over 30 minutes, parking along the street and in the lot, and climbing out with the slightly uncertain air of men who had received a call asking them to be somewhere without being told exactly why. Frank Odom from the hardware store 61, a third-generation Millhaven man who had shaken Tillis's hand at the chamber dinner every year for 2 decades. Dave Mercer from the grain cooperative. The Paulson brothers, who ran the largest farm supply operation in the county, whose family had worked the same land for 40 years. 6 or 7 others, faces Ray recognized from childhood, faces that had aged in the ordinary way of people who stayed in the same place and were shaped by it. They gathered in the lot and stood together in the loose way of people waiting for something to begin. They talked in low voices. They looked toward the diner. Ray turned from the window. Eleanor was in the booth with her book. She had finished her second cup of tea and had declined a third. She was reading with the complete absorption of a woman who has decided that the portion of this situation she has influence over is finished and the rest belongs to her daughter. Norma was behind the counter doing nothing with the careful thoroughness of someone who is doing nothing on purpose. Lena Croft was at her corner table, laptop open, recorder running. She had made 2 phone calls in the past hour in a low voice with her hand curved around her mouth. She was ready. Big Tom had not moved from the left corner. He had finished his 3rd coffee and Norma had not asked if he wanted a 4th, and he had not requested one. He was reading the same newspaper he had been reading since 7 in the morning or appearing to. Ray looked at her mother. "It's time," she said. Eleanor closed her book. She put it in her purse. She smoothed the front of her cardigan. She looked at her daughter. "Do I need to do anything? Just come outside when I tell you. And if you don't tell me, then come out anyway." Eleanor almost smiled. "Go," she said. The door of Patty's Diner opened, and Ray walked into the parking lot. The November air hit cold and clean. The gathered men looked at her. There were 17 of them now spread along the edges of the lot in the adjacent sidewalk, the population of a town's business community assembled in one place, having the particular quality of a crowd that has been told to come but has not been told what they're going to be asked to do when they get there. Tillis was standing in the center of the lot with Patterson beside him and Briggs at a distance behind. He watched Ray come out of the diner, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who has been recalibrating the picture all day and has arrived at a final version he intends to hold. Behind Ray, the door opened again. Big Tom came out and stopped at the edge of the building, hands in his jacket pockets. Des emerged from the side entrance and moved to the street side of the lot. Rabbit came out the front and positioned himself near the diner entrance. Ghost materialized at the diagonal that covered the gap between the building and the fence, which was the same position he had been occupying since 7 that morning, and the same position he seemed to find wherever he was. 4 positions, no words. Tillis watched them. He absorbed their positions, and he made the calculation he had been making all day, and he arrived once again at the same conclusion that he had more people here and more history here, and that it was still going to resolve the way these things always resolved when he was the one who had 20 years of relationships in the room. "I want the people of this town to hear something," Tillis said. His voice was pitched to carry not to Ray alone, but to everyone in the lot to constitute a public statement rather than a private one. "I want them to hear that Millhaven is not a place where outside organizations come in and disrupt what its citizens have built. That the people of this community have the right to their own lives and their own commerce without interference from," Craig, Ray said. He stopped. "Before you continue, I want to ask you something. In front of these people." He gestured slightly. "Go ahead." Millicent Cross, 81 years old, Elm Street. She's in a care facility on the other side of the county. How did she come to lose her house? A pause. Tillis's face did not change. That was a foreclosure under a signed and witnessed contract. Walt Sykes, he borrowed $11,000 to fix his roof after the August storms. 6 weeks later, he owed $17,200. How does that happen? The terms of the variable rate were disclosed in 8-point type on page 31 of a 38-page document to a 71-year-old retired electrician who needed his roof fixed before winter. The lot was very quiet. Tillis opened his mouth. Big Tom stepped forward from his position at the building's edge. He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope and walked it across the lot and held it out not to Tillis, but to Patterson. Patterson looked at the envelope. Notarized statements from 4 independent witnesses, Big Tom said. His voice was deep and unhurried and carried clearly in the cold air the voice of a man who has no interest in performance and no need for it. Covering the period from 10:55 this morning through right now, including the 11:17 incident with Miss Eleanor Coulter. Patterson opened the envelope. He looked at the first page. He turned to the second. He looked at Big Tom with the expression of a lawyer who has just discovered a foundational error in a case he had believed was solid. Those witnesses are not independent. They're clients of Marcus Webb, attorney at law, Kansas City. Ghost had spoken from the diagonal, without moving his voice, carrying with the flat precision of someone stating a weather report. Statements filed independently through Webb's office before 9 this morning, notarized by a county-certified notary. You can verify the certification number on page 4. Des had taken something from his jacket pocket. He unfolded it and held it up, a document, 2 pages with a map printed on the second page. He held it at an angle that made it visible to the people standing along the edge of the lot. Land acquisition projection for the North County corridor, Des said, cross-referenced with Tillis financial loan default records from the past 4 years. 14 parcels in the acquisition queue. He looked at the men along the lot's edge. 3 of those parcels belong to people standing here right now. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. It had weight. The older Paulson brother was looking at the map from where he stood. He was 55 years old and had been farming the land his grandfather had broken, and he was looking at the map with the focused attention of a man checking something he hopes he has read wrong. He hadn't. He looked at Tillis. "Ray," she said. Frank Odom looked at her. "Parcel 7 on that map. Do you know it?" Frank Odom knew the county's geography the way he knew the layout of his own store. 40 years of buying and selling and trading in a landscape you learn by living in it. He looked at the map. He was quiet for a moment. "Mosley Land," he said. "Past the county road. Gareth Mosley's property. He sold it 6 years ago." "Before he sold it, he transferred it into an LLC," Ray said. "The LLC is currently the registered title holder. It was never available for purchase after that transfer. Tillis has it in his acquisition documents as available." "It isn't." Tillis turned. "That transfer was never properly—" "The transfer was filed, notarized, and recorded with the county assessor on March 14th, 6 years ago. Patterson can confirm the filing number." Tillis looked at Patterson. Patterson was looking at his phone. That's correct," Patterson said quietly. "He said it the way you say things that you would rather not say, but that are too verifiable to deny. The LLC," Ray said, "is called Coulter Holdings." The door of the diner opened. Eleanor Coulter came out. She came out the way she did everything, without announcement, without theater. She was wearing her gray cardigan and her reading glasses, and she stood on the single step above the parking lot with her hands folded in front of her, and she looked at the assembled people of Millhaven the way a woman looks at a community she has been part of for 50 years. She walked down into the lot and stood beside her daughter. "Mom," Ray said. Eleanor looked at her. "The LLC, the director of record on the filing." "Is me," Eleanor said, simply, the way she said things that were simply true. The lot was completely still. Tillis looked at Eleanor. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her all day, as the soft target, the leverage point, the mechanism through which Ray Coulter could be reached and persuaded. He looked at her now, and he saw something different, and the difference was not comfortable. 2 years ago, Eleanor said, "My daughter asked me to sign some papers. She told me it was insurance paperwork." She looked at Ray. "You told me it was paperwork that protected me." "Yes," Ray said. "Was that true?" "Yes," Eleanor nodded. She turned to look at Craig Tillis. "So that land," she said, "is mine." Patterson said, to no one in particular, "Under current file documentation." "Yes." Eleanor nodded once more. The small definitive nod of a woman who has received new information and filed it correctly in the correct place. She looked at the people in the parking lot, Frank Odom, the Paulson brothers, Dave Mercer, all the others, all the people whose children she had taught and whose grief she had sat with. She looked at Craig Tillis one more time. He was still standing in the center of the lot. The surface of him was intact. The architecture of his face was intact, but something behind his eyes was doing the arithmetic of a man who has understood that the structure he is standing in has already shifted, and that the people around him can feel it even if he cannot yet say so. Eleanor turned and walked back into the diner. "Norma," she said as the door swung shut behind her, "I'd like some more tea, please." The lot did what it did next without being directed to do it. Not with noise, not with the theatrical confrontations of stories where the villain is revealed and the crowd rises. It happened in the specific deflated way of real things, people looking at each other and then at the ground and then at Tillis, with the particular expression of men who have been deciding whether to trust someone for a long time and have just finished deciding. The older Paulson brother was still looking at the acquisition map Des was holding. He was verifying. He looked at parcel 7, and then at the adjacent parcel, and then at his brother. He turned to Tillis. "Craig," he said, "my family's farmed the land adjacent to the Mosley parcel for 40 years. You have it in your acquisition queue." Tillis said, "Dale, that document doesn't represent any finalized. You lent my brother-in-law money for equipment last spring." Tillis was quiet. Frank Odom had his hands in his jacket pockets and was looking at the ground, and then at the map, and then at the ground again, the expression of a man doing arithmetic he doesn't like. "I went into the Chamber Expansion Fund last year. You suggested the property on the North Road for the new facility site." He paused. "That property is on this map." "Frank, the expansion fund is a completely separate..." "Is it?" The question sat in the cold air and did not go away. Lena Croft was at the edge of the lot with her phone up. Not in anyone's way, just doing her job. The job she had been doing for 3 months. Dave Mercer had taken out his phone and was making a call, turning away from the group, his voice too low to hear. The men who had been at the edges of the lot, the people Tillis had called to witness his authority to stand with him, to constitute a visible community endorsing his position, were moving. Not away exactly. Redistributing, recalibrating, finding slightly more distance between themselves and the center of the lot, the way people put distance between themselves and a thing when they are still deciding what they think about it, but need the distance to think. Tillis looked at them. He had spent 20 years building this. The plaques and the photographs and the handshakes and the donations and the careful cultivation of the kind of presence that becomes indistinguishable from the town itself. He had done it methodically, patiently, with the long view that most people can't sustain. He had built something real in Millhaven. That part was true. It was also true that he had built it in the way that certain things get built on a foundation that the builder doesn't examine too carefully, because examining it would complicate the building. And now the foundation was visible. Nobody was looking at him. Not Frank, not the Paulson brothers, not any of the 17 people he had called to the parking lot to witness his victory. They were looking at each other, at the ground, at the map in Des's hands. They were looking at the diner where a 72-year-old woman had just stood in the parking lot and said, "That land is mine," in the same voice she used to tell children to sit up straight. They were not looking at Craig Tillis. Tillis turned to Ray. She was waiting. She had been waiting all day with the stillness of a woman who learned somewhere in the long education of her life that patience is not a passive quality, that it requires as much precision as action, that the most important thing a person can do in certain situations is know exactly when to stop waiting and be present for what comes next. "What do you want?" Tillis said. It was the first thing he had said all day that wasn't performance. 23 people on a list, Ray said. Their debts discharged, full forgiveness filed with the county court, signed before 5 o'clock today. And the Mosley parcel stays with the LLC. What my mother does with it is her decision. And if I do all that, I go home tomorrow. You won't hear from me again, as long as the discharges hold. Tillis looked at Patterson. Patterson gave him nothing that professional neutrality had returned, but it was the neutrality of a man who has identified the correct legal advice and is waiting to be asked for it rather than offering it unsolicited. Tillis looked at the people in the parking lot. Frank Odom was looking at the ground. The Paulson brothers were talking quietly to each other. Dave Mercer had ended his phone call and put his phone in his pocket and was looking at the grain elevator at the edge of town with the expression of a man deciding something. Nobody was looking at Craig Tillis. He was in his town. 20 years of his town, every plaque and photograph and handshake and donation, and nobody was looking at him. 23 people, he said. 23. Before 5. You have 41 minutes, Ray said. Patterson has the list. Marcus Webb's office is standing by. Tillis looked at Patterson. Patterson opened the portfolio. Make the calls, Tillis said. They signed it at 4:53 on the hood of the Escalade in the parking lot because there wasn't time to go anywhere else, and because Ray had not offered to go anywhere else. Patterson was on the phone with Marcus Webb's assistant in Kansas City, confirming each discharge as it was executed, reading the case numbers and the names, and receiving confirmation in return. 23 names. 23 discharges, filed electronically with the county court as each one was completed. The people who had gathered for Tillis's demonstration of community solidarity had mostly gone by then, drifting away in the gradual, slightly self-conscious way of people who had shown up for one event and been part of a very different one. Frank Odom was still there, standing at the edge of the lot with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching. The older Paulson brother was there, not because he had been asked to stay, but because there was something about the moment that required witnessing. When Patterson closed the portfolio and said, "That's all 23, into the phone and waited for the confirmation and received it, he put his pen in his shirt pocket and looked at Ray with an expression from which the professional neutrality had entirely departed. "For whatever it's worth," Patterson said, "I didn't know the full picture of the acquisition strategy. I knew about the loans. I didn't know about the land." Ray looked at him. "I know," she said. "Get a different client." Patterson held his portfolio and nodded once and walked to the passenger side of the Escalade. Tillis was at the driver's door. He looked at Ray across the roof of the car. He had aged in the parking lot in the way that certain people age in certain hours, not in their face or their body, but in their eyes, which now had the look of someone who has spent 20 years building a particular self-image and has understood in the last 2 hours that the image was not as solid as the building of it had felt. "I did good things in this town," he said, not to Ray specifically, "in the way you say something when you need to hear it said." "I know you did," Ray said. "That's the complicated part. But you lent Millicent Cross money you knew she couldn't pay back, and you took her house. She's 81 years old, and she's in a care facility on the other side of the county because of a contract she didn't fully understand. And there are 22 other people behind her." Tillis said nothing. "The good things don't cancel that out," Ray said. "I wish they could." She stepped back from the Escalade. Tillis got in. The door closed. The engine started. The white Escalade backed out of the lot and pulled onto Main Street and drove north past the food bank plaque with his name on it, past the high school scoreboard with his name on it, past the windows of the businesses that had operated inside the gravity of his presence for 20 years. It drove until it turned a corner and was gone. Frank Odom watched it go. He looked at the space where it had been. Then he looked at Ray. "Walt Sykes," he said. "He's going to hear about this today." "Tonight," Ray said. "Webb's office is calling tonight." Frank nodded. He looked at the lot, at the amber light lying across it, at the grain elevator going dark at the edge of town. "Good," he said. He turned and walked back toward Main Street. The diner was quiet. Eleanor was in the third booth on the left with her tea and her paperback. The light through the window was gone now. The amber had bled out of the sky, and the lot outside was the flat gray of early evening, and the street lights on Main Street were coming on one by one the way they always did. Ray sat down across from her. Eleanor looked up from her book. She looked at her daughter the way she had looked at her that morning when she first walked in, the full inventory, the recalibration, and whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it. "Done, done," she nodded. She set her book down and looked out the window at the empty lot. "Walt," she said, "tonight, Webb's office will call him. He'll cry. Probably. I won't mind when he calls me," she said. "I'll just let him cry." Norma appeared with the coffee pot. She refilled Ray's mug without asking, refilled Eleanor's tea, and set a slice of apple pie between them that neither of them had ordered. "House," Norma said to the table rather than either of them, and went back to the counter. Big Tom left first. He stopped by the booth on his way out and put a folded document on the table without slowing. "Webb's confirmation. All 23. He went out the door. Des followed 10 minutes later. Rabbit after that. Ghost was simply not there when Ray looked toward the back corner. No movement, no goodbye. The booth as empty as though it had been empty since morning. Under Ghost's coffee cup, Norma found $200 and a piece of paper with a phone number and 5 words if anyone gives you trouble. She put it in her apron pocket and said nothing. She did not throw it away. Lena Croft came through the door with her bag over her shoulder and stopped at the edge of the booth. "I'm going to write everything that happened today," she said to Ray. "All of it." "I know. Your name is going to be in it. Write what you saw. That's your job." Lena looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Eleanor. "Miss Ellie, I'm sorry for what happened to you this morning." Eleanor looked at her over her reading glasses. "Don't be sorry for me," she said. "I'm fine. Write about Millicent Cross. Make sure people know her name." Lena Croft wrote something in her notebook. It took Ray a second to understand that she was writing Eleanor's exact words. "Yes, ma'am," Lena said, and went out the door. Ray drove her mother home at 6:30. Millhaven was quiet in the way it got quiet on Thursday evenings in November. A few cars moving slowly on Main Street, a light in the hardware store where someone was still working the water tower at the edge of town, holding its fading letters against the first full dark of the evening. She pulled into the driveway of the White House with the covered porch and the pot of mums by the front step. Eleanor did not get out immediately. She sat with her purse in her lap and looked at the house. "The land," she said. "What should I do with it?" "Whatever you think is right." "Could it go back to the county-designated farmland the way it's always been?" "There are ways to arrange that. Marcus Webb can help." "Then that's what I want. It should stay what it is. Land that's been farmed belongs to farming." Ray nodded. They sat for a moment in the car in the driveway. "He thought you were a man," Eleanor said. "Yes." "Tillis, when he sent Briggs, he assumed Ray was a man. People usually do." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Did that ever bother you, being underestimated that way?" Ray looked at the house, at the lit window of the kitchen where the light had come on automatically at dusk, at the porch where she had sat as a child on summer evenings before the world had become the particular size and shape it had become. "It used to," she said, "for a long time, and then I started to understand that it was useful, that the person who assumes you're no one has already made the first mistake." Eleanor considered this. "Briggs told me he was looking for Ray Coulter," she said. "When he first sat down, he said your name. I didn't correct him." Ray looked at her mother. "I know," she said. "I thought you might want the time to watch him." "You knew I was there." "I saw you when you came in," Shanner said. "You came in and did that thing you do where you look at the whole room before you sit down. You've been doing that since you were 19. I've just never asked about it until today." Ray was very still. "You sat in a booth while a man put his hand on your throat," she said, "knowing I was there." "I sat in a booth," Eleanor said, "because that's where I sit on Thursday mornings, and because I knew you were watching, and because the worst thing I could have done was give him any indication that the person he was looking for was already in the room." She paused. "I may not know exactly what you do, but I know how to protect my daughter." The silence between them was the particular silence of a truth that has been traveling a long time and has just arrived. "Mom," Ray said. "Go on," Eleanor said. She opened the car door. 2 days, you said." 2 days. "Then I need nutmeg for the pie. Don't let me forget." She got out of the car and walked to the porch and stopped at the step. "Ray." Ray had gotten out and was standing beside the car. Eleanor looked at her daughter across the driveway in the cold November evening, under the light from the kitchen window. "I know you can't tell me everything," she said. "I've known that for a long time. I stopped being troubled by it a while ago." She paused. "But I want you to know something. I know who you are. Not what you do. Who you are. Those are different things. And one of them, the one I know, is exactly who your father and I hoped you would be." She went inside. The kitchen light through the window, then the hallway, then the sitting room at the front of the house, warm and steady. Ray stood in the driveway. She stood there for a long time in the cone, looking at the lit windows and the pot of mums on the porch step and the flag at the corner of the yard moving in the November wind. She took out her phone and typed one line, "Done. Heading home safe." 9 seconds later, "Roger that, boss." She put the phone away. She stood in the driveway of her mother's house in Millhaven, Kansas, and the night was quiet around her in the specific way of small towns after something has shifted. Not the quiet of nothing happening, but the quiet of something that has happened and is now being absorbed slowly by the people who have to live with it. Somewhere in a care facility on the other side of the county, an 81-year-old woman named Millicent Cross was living in a room that was not her room, in a town that was not her town, and that was not going to change tonight and might never fully change. And Ray understood that with the clear-eyed honesty that had always been alongside everything else, the quality she was most grateful her parents had given her. She could close what she could close. She could not close the rest. She walked to the porch. She went inside. The house smelled the way it had always smelled: old wood and coffee, and the faint sweetness of whatever had been cooking earlier, and underneath all of it, the particular smell that was just the house itself, the smell of the place you grew up, that you carry your whole life and never encounter anywhere else and never stop recognizing. She hung her jacket on the hook by the door. She sat in the wooden chair in the hallway and unlaced her boots and set them by the mat the way she had done since she was a child. "There's soup on the stove," Eleanor called from the sitting room. "I'm all right." "The soup isn't optional." She went to the kitchen and heated the soup and stood at the counter eating it, looking out the window at the dark yard and the dark street and the sky above the town that was full of stars, the way Kansas skies are full of stars when you're far enough from anywhere that nothing is bright enough to wash them out. She thought about Gareth Mosley, about the hospital room, about the window and the chair beside the bed, and the way he had looked at her and said he's still doing it to other people, still doing it with the economy of a man who is conserving what he has left. She had promised. She had kept it. It was enough, and it was not enough. The way kept promises almost always are, they close what they can close and leave the rest open, and you learn to carry the open parts, because the alternative is a life in which you make no promises and keep none, and that is the only version of a life that is genuinely unacceptable. She washed the bowl and dried it and put it back on the shelf. She turned off the kitchen light. From the sitting room came the sounds of her mother reading a page, turning the small creak of the old chair, the particular quality of a room that contains a person who is exactly where they intend to be. The lamp made a rectangle of yellow on the hallway floor. Ray stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. Then she went to the sitting room and sat down in the chair across from her mother, and Eleanor looked up from her book, and for a moment neither of them said anything. They just occupied the same room the way they had occupied rooms together for 52 years, in the complete and uncomplicated way of people who do not need to perform comfort for each other, because the comfort is simply there, built out of everything that has happened and everything that has been said, and more importantly, everything that has been understood without being said. The house settled. The heat came on and went quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the November trees along the street, the same trees that had been there her entire life. And the flags on the houses along the road moved with it in the dark. She was home. For 2 days she was home. And 2 days, when you have learned to count what you have rather than what you lack, is more than enough. They had walked into Patty's diner that morning and seen an old woman drinking tea, and read the situation the way people read situations, with the shortcut part of the mind, the part that categorizes quickly and rarely looks back. They saw an elderly woman alone. They saw a middle-aged woman in old clothes who looked like nobody. They saw a situation that had always resolved in their favor when the people involved looked like these people looked. They were wrong about every part of it. But the interesting thing, the thing worth sitting with after, is not the specific way they were wrong. It is the architecture of the mistake, the assumption that what you see is what there is, that the person who doesn't announce themselves has nothing to announce, that the woman who doesn't raise her voice has no voice worth hearing. Ray Coulter had sat in that booth for 18 minutes while a man walked past her, told her to move, dismissed her as furniture, and went to put his hands on her mother. She had sat there and let it happen, not because she was afraid and not because she was powerless, but because she was waiting for the moment when moving would mean something, and she was patient enough to wait for that moment and accurate enough to know it when it came. Craig Tillis had 20 years in Millhaven. He had the plaques and the photographs and the carefully cultivated web of obligation and gratitude that constitutes local power at its most complete. He had all the visible evidence of a man who had won. Ray Coulter had a cup of cold coffee and 4 people at 4 tables and a lawyer on a retainer, and a 3-month-old investigation in the hands of a reporter, and a filing in the county records office with her mother's name on it, and 52 years of knowing the difference between what a situation looks like and what it is. And her mother was in the third booth on the left. That was enough. It was always enough.